داشتم ولی دلم موند، دلو کندم و ریشم خوند، چشا پرش دل پر غم، یه روش گولم یه رو نابغم، خوب تلخ نه مثل ساقم، گاهی ساکنم گاهی ساقم، یه رای باطلم تو این دیار غم، یه پلک میزنم همه میاد جلو چشم، جلو فریزر و تسکوچی نمیشه را بیام از دنیای جدیدی که جلومه چی میخوام. فاز اون موقع خاطر است، فوتین و فازر است، در به در اروپا تو تراک پر گل، بریم ولن با چون میریم ولن با ایون، مامورم دور تن بار جدید رسیده، توشم بار نابغه است، روی همه بار دوتی خوابیدم و یه روشه که منم رسیدم، حالا اینجام همه جوری تلخ بود، همه جوری چشیدم و لامسم که ساته، همه بیمار ولی بیدار، حالا دارم میشکافم مرزینی، توی دلم پر نور، توی سرم سکوت، همین ارزینی دیگه مرزینی، همین دستای من دوره، این شهر مثل خون سوت و کوره، درود رهبرا دروغه، خود تو فرق خلق پای چوبه.
Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be able to start this event off this morning and to welcome you all to a unique event. Thanks firstly to TARDIST for kicking off the retreat in such a beautiful and powerful way. It's a delight to be joining everybody at this unique pop culture meets social change retreat. As I'm sure you'll all agree, it's a very timely event to be bringing everyone together from such a diverse range of professions. For those who don't know me, my name is Ian Dodgen. I'm director of OKRE, and OKRE is a new charity recently spun out of the Wellcome Trust. OKRE is a global cross-sector network and a hub of creative collaboration rooted in work with the entertainment industries. And we seek to address misrepresentations, misperceptions, misunderstandings that exist in society and across culture. Addressing these matters is an interest we share with our partners in running this retreat, Counterpoints Arts, and we're delighted to have been able to work together on this event. A big thanks to them and indeed to everyone involved for pulling together such an incredible programme. And of course, a big thanks to Nikkei in particular, and I'm sure there'll be many more thanks to come over the coming days. Of course, a big thanks also to all of our funders for making this possible, and in particular to Unbound Philanthropy for your support in enabling the event to take place. As well as stimulating and inspiring, these 3 days are an amazing opportunity. They're an amazing opportunity to meet new people and some old friends, as well as making some new ones through the networking opportunities that are available. I and my colleagues from OKRE will be around and we're delighted to chat with you about how we at OKRE can support you. And of course, if you'd like to get in touch with us and find out more, you can sign up via our website at okre.org or follow us on our socials at OKRE Social. But for now, I know we're all keen to get into the programme, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague at Counterpoints, Almir, who's going to explain more.
Hello, thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. We are very excited and very grateful that you've accepted our invitation and joined us here today. I'm Almir Koljic. I'm Director of Counterpoints Arts. And for those of you who are not familiar with our work, we are an arts organization with a focus on displacement and migration. And our mission is to diversify, mainstream, normalize the experiences of displacement and migration in our arts, history, and culture. And we do it through a range of arts-centered, often ambitious and always collaborative approaches that involve partners and collaborators from a range of different fields across the UK and internationally. As we don't have time to go into it, I'm going to put a link in the feed where you can see a document with more information about our story so far and a vision for where we want to go next. This retreat is a part of an ongoing series of retreats that we've been organizing since 2016. And even though this time we are not exactly retreating to a remote setting in a beautiful Dorset, it's more likely that we are retreating to the least disruptive and noisy corners of our rooms. The aim is the same. We are coming here as artists, producers, funders, policymakers, advocates, for what should be a 3-day of really interesting conversations, collaborations, and the imaginings of our hopefully collective future action. The focus of the retreat, as Ian said, is on popular culture and social change. And this is an intersection that we've been working in and exploring for the last few years through our Pop Change program. And during this time, what we have seen is that the ecosystem for popular culture and social change has grown enormously, partly because of what's been happening around us, and has become this very powerful vehicle for action that's full of potential. We also see that there's a lot more to be done in brokering new relationships, bringing industries together, building trust. And this retreat that we are organizing is our small contribution and hopefully a step towards addressing that need. As Ian said, this retreat has been made possible with the support of Unbound Philanthropy, Open Society Foundation, and a range of other funders who have supported our work throughout the years. Unbound Philanthropy in particular have been a trusted friend of our organization. They have supported us since the beginnings, and they are really responsible for us being here together, because it's thanks to their willingness to take risks, to forge new paths, and to create new initiatives that we are gathering here today. They've also been supporting this area of work in the US for a number of years. In many ways, the ecosystem in the US is much more developed and is a model of practice that we can learn a lot from. Finally, I wanted just to say that as an arts organization, we want to take measured risks in order to remain creative, in order to remain relevant, but also to transform with the times and the happenings around us. And we think this retreat is a good example of this risky approach, because we are using this new AirMeet platform that's new to all of us, or most of us. We are collaborating for the first time with OKRE, which comes with its own delightful challenges and privileges, as any new relationship does. We are stepping here into conversations and fields of practice where we have no expertise, but will rely on you, our speakers, and workshop leaders and others to bring that expertise and knowledge into these conversations. And the majority of people here today are new to our conversations and organizations. So all of this means that we are taking some measured risks. It also means that we will not get everything right. We will probably make mistakes along the way. Things won't work out as smoothly as we would want them to, but we hope you will work with us, you will learn with us, and mostly that you will enjoy it, that you will get enriched in the process, and hopefully leave with a few new friends. I'm now going to introduce briefly our hosts who will guide us through the rest of the day. Jo Glanville and Sachrajda Chakrabarti. Jo is a journalist, writer, editor, and radio producer. She's a long-standing campaigner for freedom of expression, who was editor of Index of Censorship and English Pen. She's also a very good friend of our organization who supported us over the last few years. Sachrajda Chakrabarti is a freelance journalist who's written for The Guardian, The Times, The Mirror, and comedian. Since starting in comedy a year ago, she has written for various programs on BBC Radio 4 and has been nominated for various performance and comedy awards. Sachrajda is a new friend of our organization and someone we hope to work with for a long time after this retreat. I'm going to hand you over to them now, but thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoyed.
Well, hi everyone. Jo and I are here to co-host, and we're just going to give her a second to see if her connection is okay. So just bear with us, and hopefully all of your connections are okay as well. Looking hopeful? What are we thinking?
Thanks very much.
Jo
Hello, everyone. I'm Jo Glanville. I'm delighted to be hosting the retreat for Counterpoints Arts and OKRE. I've been working with Counterpoints Arts over the past 2 years. And I've seen firsthand all the creative thinking they harness to influence social change. After a very difficult year for all of us, when so many working in the arts have been struggling to survive, this feels the right moment to be bringing so many talented people together and making connections. We've got participants today all over the world, from the United States to India. I know how hard it is for all of us to enjoy a retreat from our own homes, from our bedrooms, from our kitchens, to our city, my own kitchen. But one thing that I think we've all seen over the past 3 years is that you can change the world. You can change the world from your own bedroom. We've been listening to, we've seen it in Black Lives Matter. And just this week, we've set up what's out in the UK. We've seen a really extraordinary thousand of voices calling for the protection of women and speaking out to safeguard right protest. It can take one spark, often a dramatic event, to kick off momentum. The shocking murder of George Floyd in the US and the appalling killing of Sachrajda in the UK. Each of those terror events have triggered extraordinary movements to change. So this retreat comes under opportunity in which there's a time of emergency. Potential to change the world we live in is really represented. And pop culture, with its vast global audience, is a unique place to bring about change. And I think we know we can make a difference. I'd like to hand over to the co-host for today, Sachrajda. She's going to explain what she'll be doing at the retreat.
Thanks for that, Jo. Just give me a second to check that. Should we keep carrying on? Yep. Yeah. Okay. So hi everyone. I'm Sachrajda, and my background's in journalism. So I worked in newspapers and news agencies for years, and now I'm a freelance journalist since 2018. So yeah, I've worked on that side of things, and since I'm freelance, I've worked with the Refugee Journalism Project, which is based at the London College of Communication. If you don't know, it's a great project to know about. And someone I know, Abdul Tahan from the project, is actually on a panel tomorrow. So I'll be co-hosting today with Jo, but I'll also be back tomorrow for the other side of my role. I'm also a comedian. I started working in stand-up about a year ago, which tells you everything about my comedy timing. It is terrible, so I apologise for that in advance. But I'll also be moderating a panel with refugees who have also become stand-up comedians tomorrow, which will be really fun and really interesting. And I've also written about comedy and social change for the New Brave World report, which we're going to hear more about on a panel in about an hour's time. So look forward to hearing from you guys and to learning more about today and guiding you through it along with Jo. So yeah, thanks a lot. Back to Jo.
I think I'm just going to jump in here while Jo is sorting out some of her internet issues, and I'm just going to talk quickly about some house rules and safeguarding for this event. Obviously, we want this retreat to be I'll introduce myself. I'm Sam. I'm working with Counterpoints for this retreat. We want this retreat to be a safe and welcoming space for everyone who takes part. We're coming here from many different backgrounds and experiences, so we ask that if you join us, please be sensitive and also generous in our conversations. If you do need to step out at any time, you are of course welcome to do so. And if you need anything or have any concerns, you can send me or anyone in the Counterpoints team a message using the chat box, or you can find us at the info table, which is the first table in the lounge. Please note that we are filming this morning's presentations to share on the Counterpoints Arts website and social media. As participants, you will not be visible. However, if you do choose to ask a question, you may be brought on stage and you will be visible then. So please keep that in mind. Quickly, I'm just going to run through the AirMeet platform. I can see some of you have already found the emoji function, which is great. It's an all-new platform, so we want to make sure everyone feels comfortable. You all have a personalized link that will be used across all 3 days, which you should know because you've gotten on here today. There is a closed caption option at the bottom of my face here that's just a little CC. Please feel free to turn that on if you need it. You can see the chat function on the right-hand side, which you can use to contact people within the retreat. To ask a question, you can raise your hand using the control bar below. The host will then invite you on stage to ask your question. Please note again that you will be visible to the participants and on the live stream if you do this. Alternatively, you can use the Q&A section. In this section, other participants can upvote your question and the host can choose questions based on popularity. If you have any difficulty seeing the speaker's feed at any point, please refresh your page and ensure that you close any other video conferencing tool that you might have used recently. The lounge, hopefully some of you have seen that this morning. This is a space where you can network. This is where the speed networking will be taking place, and you can also take a seat at the table to chat with other participants. As I said, the first table, table 1, will always be reserved as an info desk. Finally, in the arena, you will find session videos and content from the previous day. So tomorrow you'll find content from today. You will also find an AirMeet help space in case you need any further information. So please show your appreciation in the comments and the chat. If you are going to use social media, use the hashtag #PopExchange. And I think that's back to Jo and Sachrajda. I hope Jo is working now. If not, it's over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Let's just see if Jo is connected. Just give her a second. Might be right back online to introduce the next panel. No, okay. I'm just going to get us started then, and if Jo's able to come back, that'd be brilliant. So we're delighted to introduce Marcus Ryder, who's coming up next. Jo's here. Brilliant. Jo, you're right to... No, I don't think she is. Okay. So we're delighted to welcome Marcus Ryder, who's up next. Marcus is right here. He's a leading figure in the efforts to increase diversity and representation in the UK media industry. So he's the author, with Lenny Henry, some of you might have heard of him, of Access All Areas, a manifesto to change the debate about the diversity in the media. And he was also a founding member of the Sir Lenny Henry Institute for Media Diversity. He coordinated the campaign for the film and television diversity tax breaks to increase the representation of women, ethnic minorities, and disabled people working in the film and TV industry. He has more than 25 years of experience working in TV, radio, and online, and he was previously editor of BBC Scotland Current Affairs. Marcus is also a visiting professor at Birmingham City University for Media Diversity. So, Marcus, you're going to speak for 15 minutes. And we'll have 15 minutes to ask questions. I'm going to turn off my camera, but I'll be back 1 minute before you finish your talks. I'll be your warning, just my face. So please welcome Marcus and show your appreciation, please, with the emojis. We've got 30 minutes overall and 15 minutes from Marcus now.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. If not, send in some emojis with people with horrible faces or something, sad faces. Okay, so here goes. So good morning, everybody. It's a massive privilege being given the opportunity to talk to you today. I've worked with Lenny Henry for roughly 8 years, campaigning to increase better media diversity and representation, writing speeches together. We went to Parliament, been to Parliament several times, devising policies, and more recently we wrote the book Access All Areas, a Diversity Manifesto for TV and beyond. I fundamentally believe that increased representation of all sections of society in the media industry is not just about being nice. It's basically one of the most important issues facing Britain today. One only has to look at the recent Harry and Meghan interview with Oprah and the fallout over the last week and a half to see what a hot subject it is and just how important it is for society. And most of the work that I've focused on is about representation behind the camera. And this isn't just because we think it's nice to have more representation, although it is. When it comes to representation in the media, it's fundamentally a question about democracy and whether we can all live in peace with one another. So let's look at documentary filmmaking first. You cannot have freedom of speech if large parts of society are not given equal access to the media. What we see in the news determines what politicians talk about and actually do anything about. But if we actually look at our news programmes in the UK, there is not a single major news programme, from BBC Breakfast News to the Today programme to Panorama to Channel 4 News to the 10 on or the 6 on ITV to Dispatches, which is headed by a person of colour or anybody with a visible who is visibly disabled. That is going to affect which stories they decide to pick and how they cover them. And it's not just news which is important. Drama impacts us on an emotional level. It enables us to walk in the shoes of another person and understand their reality in a way that factual programs do not. If we want to understand our diverse neighbourhoods, if we want to be a society at peace with itself and not trying to scapegoat one part of society or another, I believe drama is the best way to do that. So we need true diversity in drama. We need disabled people telling their stories so I can understand the world from their perspective. I need women to have equal access to directing their own films, which women clearly do not right now. So I can literally see the world through their eyes. And I want people of colour to be able to create dramas and comedies so you can all feel our joy and pain. Right now, the industry that I love, and I suspect most of you here love as well, is failing us. If you look at film and TV in the UK, women make up only 13.6% of working film directors. Things don't get much better for Black and Asian people when you start to delve into the stats. Non-white people make up 14% of England and Wales, but just 2.2% of TV directors. And when it comes to disability, things get even worse, despite the fact that 14% of people in employment age, that's 16 to 64, consider themselves disabled. According to Creative Skill Set Employment Census, only 0.3% of the total film workforce are disabled. Now, like I said, you cannot have democracy without freedom of speech, and freedom of speech is meaningless if certain sections of society are disproportionately denied access to the platforms for their voices to be heard and their stories to be told. Therefore, media representation and what we now commonly call diversity and inclusion is really a democracy issue. Now, when most people think about this, they think I'm talking about current affairs, but there is a very good reason that during the McCarthy witch hunts, they went after drama directors and other creative people, because drama reframes how we see the world. Drama provides the narratives which we understand the world. Often news and current affairs simply provide the facts which replace the narrative structures that we have created by drama. So I think it's important that we explore the idea of narratives and how narratives are formed. The former editor of the Observer magazine once said to me, "We argue in anecdote, but we believe in narrative." Now, what did he mean by that? Now, when I'm having an argument with somebody, I will argue with anecdotes and random facts to try and prove my point. So I will say something like, my disabled friend went to 10 interviews and couldn't get a job. My able-bodied friend got a job really easily. It's an anecdote. Or I'll say, disabled people make up less than 1% of the film workforce. It's a random fact, but it's a fact that supports my argument, but we argue in anecdotes. And we throw these random facts and anecdotes to make the point we are trying to and win the argument. But our core beliefs are built around narratives of how the world works. Now, I have a small son, he's 4 years old, and I've become obsessed with narratives. As adults, we remember very little before we were about 3.5, and this has puzzled scientists because young children can definitely remember things. They're not like goldfish that forget everything after 10 seconds. At 2, my son knew his favourite books. He knew I wasn't a stranger to him every time I picked him up and changed his nappy. I like to think of myself as a modern father, and I changed a lot of nappies. And so what is happening there? If they've got memories and yet they can't remember anything before 3.5. Well, one theory is that it's all about narratives. At about the age of 3.5, 4, children start to develop the ability to understand and construct narratives. It is narratives that enables them to put facts and memories in context, understand them, evaluate their importance, and ultimately hold on to them. Narratives, which are often shaped by drama, give us the framework to understand the facts and the anecdotes that we are given. This is why diversity in drama and in the creative arts is so important. It's important in things such as gaming as well. I recently spoke to the historian David Olusoga, and he talks about a moment of cognitive dissonance he experienced as a child when his mother told him Nigerians fought in World War II. He was obsessed with World War II as a child, by the way. He couldn't take it in because all the toys and comics and movies he had were of exclusively white people fighting in the war. He had constructed a narrative as a child which actually made it hard for him to process this new information. He needed to construct a new narrative, and trying to construct a new narrative as a child or even as an adult by yourself is really difficult. So that's why the creative arts, whether it's gaming, whether it's drama, whatever it is that helps us create our narratives and understanding of the world, is so important. If Nigerians had been given equal access to producing the comics and toys that a young David Olusoga had been consuming, I doubt he would have created this erroneous narrative. And so he would be able to access the facts that he had and place them in that narrative that Nigerians fought in the war. So this is why we need more diversity. But how do we achieve it? Now, it's the one thing that I think we often hear senior executives talk about, and that's the idea of risk. So I want to very briefly talk about the idea of risk. We often hear executives say, anyone who's worked in the industry, when they're trying to bring forward diversity, saying, oh, employing the black director I haven't worked with before is risky, commissioning a new script from a disabled writer, oh, that's a risk. And they often talk about diversity and increasing diversity in terms of risk. You'll hear the most nice liberal person saying, I'm not against diversity, I just want a safe pair of hands. I just can't afford to take the risk. Right? And this risk idea is often weaponized against underrepresented people as to why they shouldn't be able to give an access. Right? And advocates of diversity often say they're not risky, and they argue against risk, and they say, there's some really experienced people and what have you. Now, the trouble is that even if you win the argument through your anecdotes, right, you actually don't normally achieve anything, right? And the reason why diversity advocates never have much success in this is because they are accepting the framework, they're accepting the narrative that the senior executive or the gatekeeper has already put down, right, about risk. They're arguing about risk. Now, if you know some economic game theory, the executive might have framed it as risk, but it's not really risk that the person's talking about. What they're actually talking about, right? Because senior executives they're employed to take risks. Creative industries is a very risky process. They are brilliant at taking risks, right? But what they're really talking about, even though they don't realize it, is regret. And there's a difference between risk and a regret. Let me explain the difference really quickly. Buying a lottery ticket is risky. Not buying it and finding out that it could have been the winning ticket leads to regret. Okay? Economic game theory explains that a lot of the time what people are doing is not trying to minimize risk, but minimize regret. Right? Now, regret, as defined by economics, is the difference between the real outcome and the alternative, quote unquote, better outcome that didn't happen. Right? In other words, it's the difference between the happiness you derived from reality versus the happiness you think you could have derived from an imagined counterfactual. That is regret. The greater the difference between the two, the counterfactual and reality, the bigger the regret. That is why people often buy lottery tickets. They're not trying to minimize the risk of losing money. If they were doing that, the easiest course of action is not to buy a ticket. Most of the time, what they're trying to do is minimize regret. The regret of potentially not buying the winning ticket. Because if they find out that they could have bought it or their friend bought it, it's a massive regret. The counterfactual is a massive regret. Right? So what has this got to do with diversity? In the regret model, if a media executive commissions a program to be directed by a white director, an able-bodied director, that they have never worked with before, this carries far less potential regret than working with a black director they've never worked with before. Why is this? If the program by the white director does terribly, the exec has no regrets about employing the white director on the basis of their race. Because in the alternative, counterfactual scenario, right, the other director that he thought about employing was also white. So there's no regret based on race, right? However, if they employ a black director and it does badly, then the alternative counterfactual scenario involves a white director. Therefore, there is a regret based on race. Both scenarios, I hope you're bearing with me, both scenarios are equally risky, right? But one has far more potential for regret than the other based on race, right? Or it could be based on disability, or it could be based on gender, right? But if the counterfactual is normally an able-bodied white man, right, that's why the regret is bigger if you employ somebody from an underrepresented group. It is therefore not surprising, right, that this is a massive issue in the media industry, right? Because one of the biggest things that contribute to regret is if it's made public, right? To use an old-fashioned term, it's just called shame. Shame amplifies your ideas of regret. So once you understand the theory of regret and how it's different from risk, rather than have ad infinitum arguments about risk, which diversity champions appear to win, but fail to change people's actions, right? We need to actually address the real issue, which is minimizing regret, right? So how do we do that? The way we do that is that we want to reframe the conversation with regards to how do we minimize regret, but we turn regret on its head. Okay? So possibly the easiest way to do is to present regret, the potential regret of not commissioning the next Black Panther movie, right? Of not commissioning the next best-selling game by a person of color, of not commissioning the next small acts, right? Of not commissioning, so that you will regret if you don't identify that black person or that person of color or that disabled person, right? So you want to frame it in terms of potential regret if you don't identify these people from underrepresented groups, right? So once we start doing that, we can then actually have a debate and frame the discussion on our terms rather than trying to argue it on somebody else's terms. And this is what Lenny Henry and I were trying to do with our book. We are actually trying to change the framing of our conversation. We want to change the framing and the narrative of how we discuss diversity. And we think it's only then that we might be able to achieve what we want to achieve, which is increasing diversity. All too often, what we're doing is accepting the current framing, accepting the current framework, right, the current narrative, right, and then trying to argue within it. And we haven't got very far. Now, the bottom line is that the vast majority of people here are creative people, I think, who are taking part. And if we're good at anything, it is creating narratives, it is creating stories. We are storytellers. We are creative people. So if anybody can change the narrative, if anybody can change the stories that we tell about ourselves and the stories we tell about diversity, it should be us. And to be honest with you, this is the reason I'm here today. Because I know that the people who can actually change the way that we view the world and change the way that we view diversity is the creative sector, because we create the narratives that people understand the world in. And that's it. Person hasn't popped up yet, but I'm hoping they'll pop up soon because I've come to an end of my speech. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcus. That was great. Thanks a lot. So if the audience could show their appreciation, please do get those emojis going because we can't hear you clapping. I'm sure you are all clapping at home alone at your laptops. So please get those emojis going. We love to see them. And we're going to dive into the chat if you've got questions. So start getting those questions in there. We'll have a look for ones that are already in there. I can see a few. To ask a question live as well, you can raise your hand using the hand emoji at the bottom. And if you do that, we might be getting you on stage to ask your question as well, so you will be visible. So just remember that. If you want to ask a live question, use the hand emoji at the bottom. We'll get you on stage live. But you can also put it in the chat. So I've got a couple of questions for you first, Marcus. I get in there first because I'm the host. So a landmark research commission into racial inequality in the arts sector was announced this week by the Runnymede Trust and Freelands Foundation, who've partnered together to deliver the first major commission into how Black, Asian and minority ethnic, or BAME, students are excluded from arts education. So what's the key question do you think they need to ask about that?
I don't know. I think what I'm constantly trying to do is not necessarily look at headcounts. I think invariably we look at headcount when we talk about diversity, and I think that it's often money is a very is a good way of measuring power. It's a good substitute for looking at power and looking at commitment. Mm. And so if we were to try to do measurements, I've increasingly talked about the idea that we should, when it comes to television, when it comes to measuring other industries, we don't just measure it in terms of is it 20% disabled or 20% people of color. Is the salary spend 20%? Or is the salary spend? Right. And so what I would want to look at is that instead of just looking at the headcount numbers when it comes to children and what have you, is to actually look at the funds and the finances and try and measure the percentage of money which is spent on different groups of people. Because I think that can be not instead of, but complementary to how we measure diversity. So that would be key for any work that I would want to progress.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's making sure that even if there is a percentage that looks really good in terms of diversity, that those people aren't just stuck at the lower levels and kind of then possibly leaving the industry, which happens a fair amount now. We're looking at the actual spend, which means that maybe
and if you and if you're looking at education, you know, it's no point that if you have 20% BAME, Black, Asian and minority ethnic, but they're only actually receiving 10% of the funds, you know, of that education. You can not easily, but you could make a head count and still be very much disadvantaged. So I think the two things should be looked at in tandem.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Then I've got one more question before we throw to the audience. So again, there's a percentage in here. Only 2.7% of the arts workforce come from a BAME background. So you've made a very successful career in the media at the BBC. So what single change do you think the BBC could introduce to create a diverse workforce? And is there just one?
So what has shaped a lot of my thinking with regards to diversity is that I moved up to Scotland in 2007, which is when the BBC was looking at increasing regional diversity. And Channel 4 is currently undergoing a similar process of looking at increasing regional diversity. And in order to achieve that, they ring-fenced funds, which they said would be spent on productions in Scotland and Wales and outside of London. And so I think we need to look at the economic frameworks. And so that's why I've argued with regards to ring-fence funds previously for diverse productions. I've argued for tax breaks because otherwise I feel that we very quickly slip into unconscious bias training or begging for the largesse of nice, senior, able-bodied white people to be, please do the nice thing, please be a good person and employ me. Whereas if we can actually change the economic framework which we're functioning in, change the ecosystem which we're all functioning in, that means that is in everybody's economic interest and everybody's interest to increase diversity, then I think that would be far more productive. And that's what they did with regional diversity. And I think we should look at ways in which we can try and do that. And I said that's what I've been doing over the last couple of years, looking at ring-fence funds, looking at dedicated funds, top slicing, contestable funds, looking at diversity tax breaks and what have you. So it's looking at the economic models.
Yeah, that's a great way to go about things. It's presenting this as a solution as opposed to an extra thing to think about, which sometimes is characterized as. So yeah, that sounds very hopeful. So now it's time for audience questions. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat. Is there anyone with their hand up at all? Anyone who'd like to ask a live question? We've got quite a few in the chat to go. So we've got one here from, great, Amina. Yeah, do you want to ask a question?
Hi, Marcus. Whoa, my face is so close. You're right. My question is basically, I think the risk and regret concept is it's a great concept. I've never seen it in that way. And I think when we apply that, it just puts everything into perspective. But I was just thinking about the role of researchers and producers. I just think they play a vital role. And I personally saw after the Black Lives Matter, a lot of BBC researchers were calling up, not just myself, but some of my creative peers and saying, do you know anyone in the community? Do you know anyone in the community? So I can tell there's been a shift in engagement and how they're working. But when I've been behind this, episodes of series and TV, I just find researchers play a vital role, and I don't think we talk. So we don't really look at what's presented on the stage, and I sometimes feel like, and I've said this before, sometimes they want our art, but they don't want us, and they want our mangoes and our camels, but they don't want us to lead it, And it's and I think I really want to have a discussion about the role of researchers in TV and the role that they play and how vital it should be. But also, if we have more diverse producers and researchers in this industry, it'll just make things easier in terms of representation. I just thought I'd throw it out there from experience.
No, I completely agree. We need to have, we definitely need more researchers who have links to the communities and actually are from those communities. I think the problem is that often the tasks is that if the producers don't listen to their researchers, often all the researchers are doing is running around finding the type of people or finding contributors to fit into the framework or the narrative that the producer or the more senior person has already constructed. And so what you want researchers, and they do play a vital role because they can actually forge connections and that we wouldn't otherwise have. But you want to make sure that they're not just servicing a narrative and framework which is set by senior people from non-diverse backgrounds. But yeah, I agree with you. We need all of that behind the camera.
Great, thanks so much, Amina, for coming on stage. Any more raised hands? I can't see any at the moment. So we'll go to some of the questions in the chat. This one's from Awate Abdallah. We saw lots of pledges to commission or spend X amount from production companies and studios after the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer. Many people I've seen and spoken to have seen no impact. Have you, Marcus?
So the short answer, right. So what I would say to that is, again, as I said, I've got a lot of my understanding from regional diversity. And what we needed to increase regional diversity is the BBC and Channel 4 have had to say that we will be doing this spend, not just in 2 years' time, not just in 3 years' time, but they committed to 10 years and beyond. You know, the BBC set up Salford. They spent millions of pounds on a new building. In Glasgow, they built a new bridge over the Clyde and created a new building. So everybody could see that this was not going away in 2 years or 3 years' time. There was a serious commitment. And we need that serious commitment, because if people are actually going to employ people, if people have the confidence to set up new businesses, to invest, they need to have confidence that this flow of money is not just going to be a knee-jerk reaction to George Floyd, not just going to be, and a knee-jerk meaning lasting 2 years, maybe even 3 years. But you can't set up your own business thinking that this money, even if the money comes through, but with the concern that this money could dry up after 2 or 3 years. No business can work like that, right? And so what we really need is that even if people have seen positives from the money, what the BBC's and Channel 4's regional experience has shown is that there needs to be a commitment that this money is for the next at least 10 years. Otherwise, people will not set up their businesses. It's just the way it's, again, it's about making sure that we don't think of it just in terms of diversity, but we think about how do we create the economic environment for diversity to thrive.
Absolutely. I love your emphasis on the economic kind of argument for diversity and representation. It seems like a very strong one. We've got like 1 more minute before we move on to the next panel. So I just wanted to see if we can get one more question done. It's from Chloe Hardy. So audiences must have some power in media industries, and maybe more than we think. Do you have ideas about how audiences can exercise their own power in this regard? And it's going to have to be a quick answer.
Okay, it's a real quick one. It depends on the economic model. So, for example, if you're talking about the BBC, the power of the audience is to actually lobby government, lobby your politician. If you're talking about ITV, which is advertising funded, your power is to switch off, right? Because you're not going to get advertising revenue. And if you're talking about streaming, your power is to not subscribe, right? And so it's not one answer as to what the power of the audience is. Audiences leverage different types of power depending on the economic model, right, of how the producer of the content makes their money. And so the leverage you're going to have over streamers has to be exercised differently. So we need to think intelligently if we're going to try and exercise that power.
Yeah, the audience does have power. You're completely right. Well, thank you so much, Marcus. That was so interesting, and it's definitely reframed my idea of we thought we had one kind of argument, but because it was the wrong argument, it doesn't land. And actually thinking about representation as an economic solution could be something that actually works for us, and it could be a more positive way of looking to change things. So thank you so much. Again, can the audience show their appreciation? We love some emoji. We love to see those streaming up the screen. I would say thank you to Marcus, and we'll move on to our next panel. Thank you so much, Marcus. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you so much. That was great.
That was great. It's really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so we will move on to our next panel. So we are partly here because we are celebrating a new report being released, New Brave World, and I keep having to try really hard to get that the right way around. New Brave World. So on the next panel, we're going to have Alice Sachrajda, Kay Biswas and Marzena Zukowska, who put together this report on pop culture and social change. And I was really pleased to be commissioned to write a piece on comedy and social change for this report. So really looking forward to hearing from each of the panelists. They're going to speak for 5 minutes each, give us a presentation, and then there'll be, again, as with Marcus, the opportunity for questions. So please start putting them in the chat. And as we get started, please show your appreciation as always. Obviously, we can't hear you, but we'd love to see your emojis. They get us going. And yeah, here we go. Here's the next panel. So what I'll do, similar thing again. You guys go in order and give your presentations, and then we've got 1 minute left to go. I'll switch my camera back on.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sachrajda. And thank you very much to Counterpoints Arts and to OKRE for all of your work in putting together this retreat today and over the next few days. It all looks absolutely amazing, and we're very excited about what's to follow. My name is Alice Sachrajda, and I work as a cultural strategy consultant. My main client is Unbound Philanthropy, and I've been working with them over the last few years. And I'm going to start by sharing some of the background which led to us researching and writing the report that Sachrajda mentioned, New Brave World, which has come out today. And I'm then going to pass on to Marzena Zukowska, my co-author, and she's going to outline some of the themes that we uncovered in the report. And then she's going to pass to Biz, who commissioned a fantastic series of articles and in conversations, which have really helped to add depth and greater set of perspectives to this report. So this report largely came about thanks to the vision and support of Unbound Philanthropy. Ian and Almir both mentioned Unbound and their role as a really key funder in this space. And I just wanted to start by reflecting on some of the work in the US, which has helped to really establish and strengthen the pop culture for social change field. Marzena, is it possible for you to share your screen so that we can have the slides up? So in 2016, Liz Mann and Associates put out the Pop Justice Report series, and this then led to the creation of the Pop Culture Collaborative. It's a pooled fund which is investing at this intersection of pop culture and social change. And the Pop Culture Collaborative, supported by Unbound and a number of other funders, have played a really influential role in investing in artists and creatives and change makers. And I think one of the things that they've really helped to do is to normalise the idea that funders can and should invest at this intersection of pop culture and social change. And in fact, one of our interviewees for this report commented that 3 years ago, there was a lot of scepticism, and we've had a job in convincing people about work in this pop culture sphere. But now there's much more interest, and it's less about making the case, and instead has shifted to being about developing a more sophisticated approach that really explores how cultural change happens. So since 2016, I've been researching and exploring how we can develop and support similar streams of work here in the UK. And in 2017, I published a report called Riding the Waves. And I worked with Esme Peach to produce that report. And it surveyed the pop culture for social change landscape. And we set out some really key themes, including representation, authenticity, normalization, narratives, novelty, and relationships. And then next slide. So over the last few years, it's been really exciting to see all of this work develop and grow in the UK. OKRE's spin out from the Wellcome Trust is so exciting. It means it can bring such a wealth of experience and knowledge and networks to this space. And Counterpoints Arts is really innovating and experimenting through its Pop Change programme. So these and many other really exciting initiatives are starting to play this role of carving out this pop culture and social change niche in the UK. So right at the start of this journey, we were really inspired by the words and leadership of Bridget Antoinette Evans, the executive director of the Pop Culture Collaborative in the US. And she speaks really powerfully about what she calls the narrative ocean. So she describes how we're all swimming in a kind of ocean, except instead of water swirling around us, there are narratives. And these narratives are influencing everything about how we think, live, and see ourselves in the world. These narratives feel like reality to us, like the air we breathe. They are our world. And I think it's really helpful to think about culture and pop culture in particular in this way. It's around us all of the time, from the programs we watch and read and talk about with our friends, to the music we listen to and the games that we play. And our immersion in culture helps to shape who we are and how we think. And so last year, Marzena and I got talking, and we decided that now would be a really important juncture to review this again and explore the exciting work that's really playing a role in strengthening and growing this field. But we both felt quite strongly that we didn't just want to survey and scope the field, but we also really wanted to delve deeply into the power structures at play and explore where there were opportunities and potential to build on. And so where Riding the Waves was more at a surface level, surveying and scoping, with New Brave World, we really wanted to go deeper. We wanted to dive into that narrative ocean that Bridget Antoinette Evans talked about. And in fact, Marcus also shared and talked about earlier. And so in order to do that, we wanted to really ensure that we had a breadth of perspectives and a multiplicity of voices. And so we really hope that you enjoy reading the commission pieces in the report, which we feel add so much depth to the overall piece. So we feel that the fusion of social change makers, movement builders, narrative experts, creatives and funders has the potential to be one of the biggest driving forces of social and environmental change in our world over the years to come. And we really need to work together to harness the power and opportunities and potential of pop culture for social change. And so now I'm going to hand over to Marzena, who will share a bit more about the themes that we outline in the report. Thank you. Marzena, we can't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes,
oh,
hooray!
Great. Hi, everyone. It wouldn't be a true virtual retreat without some technical difficulties. So, hi, everyone. I'm Marzena. I'm a writer, comm strategist, and community organizer. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and getting back to the report. So, as Alice mentioned, our goal really is to kind of pique your interest enough with this presentation to make you want to read and dig into the report. In it, we really kind of focus on many key themes that you can explore in many ways non-linearly. So you can weave between the different sections. You could take a look at a commission that's written by a creative working in the industry. You could dig into the power of pop culture. You could look at some of the opportunities we lay out for funders. So in this report, there's really something for everyone. We start off in it with setting the scene and sort of looking at the major cultural trends that we've seen since 2017 and how they shape production and creative outputs. You kind of can't get three pop culture nerds together writing a report without actually digging into the meat of TV, video games, and film. And so the major cultural trends that we dig into include COVID-19, the rise of nostalgia programming, historical realism, from queer liberation to reckoning with Britain's legacy of colonialism, looking at comedy to depict everyday life, sci-fi and Afrofuturism, paying our respects to many of the incredible creatives who are working on it, and looking at the mainstreaming of gaming culture. However, the meat of our analysis is really embedded in the power, opportunities, and potential of pop culture, those three specific areas. But first, we really grapple with pop culture through this dual lens of structural and narrative power that Marcus Ryder has already spoken to. So on the one hand, we look at who gets to write, produce, and access resources, and how this mirrors existing dynamics in society, from systemic racism to misogyny to any number of institutional inequalities. We look at Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You, the game Spider-Man Miles Morales, the youth-led film Rocks, and many other examples of how creatives are taking back radical control over work. But we don't stop there, because we recognize that culture is not just a reflection of the world around us, but is active in shaping it. As such, we look to social movements as the experts in power building. So from Black Lives Matter to Time's Up and Me Too to the global fight for migrants' rights, we look at how leading social movements have used art, film, and television and video games to challenge oppressive social norms. In Opportunities, we dig into television drama specifically as a way to disrupt some of these existing power structures. We look at a lot of organizations like On Road Media, Access All Areas, and Stopwatch, which have worked to ensure that people with lived experience lead, shape, and direct content we watch across dramas and soaps. Many of these organizations have emphasized the need to amplify this work. So we look to strategic communications and research on framing as one way to do that. In the report, we also explore a number of different inspirations from the US, from organizations like Pop Culture Collaborative, Break the Room, Color of Change, and Storyline Partners. Finally, in this section, we offer some practical opportunities for funders and those working in philanthropy, including in ways to actually invest in cross-sector networks in the UK, take donors on a learning journey for why they need to invest in pop culture, and looking at ways to have cross-border and transatlantic knowledge exchanges. In the last section, we dig into potential. In here, we really look at how the fluidity of culture allows stories to traverse different entertainment mediums and forms, right? So from film and television to gaming and graphic novels. The vast rise in popularity of streaming platforms and the global growth in gaming are really indicators of the direction and the speed we are traveling. Gaming and accessible technologies in particular are areas of emergence, have potential, and very much worthy of research and philanthropic investment. Yet they have been historically, and specifically by philanthropy, overlooked. And as such, in this section, we share insights from a lot of different pioneering organizations, many of whom are in this room today with us, that are using gaming to make storytelling more immersive and accessible and available to all. So just to briefly summarize some of our conclusions and recommendations before I pass it over to Biz, very, very briefly and concisely, we need to recognize that culture has power, and we need to grapple with this power. We need to bring an intersectional lens to this work, and we very much take our lead from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and Audre Lorde in the US, who emphasize that human beings are not just diversity boxes to tick, and that culture, does not exist in isolation from other inequalities. We call for a mapping of the pop culture for social change ecosystem, which we did preliminarily and ambitiously in the report, but we need way more investment into. We need to better connect grassroots social movements with people working on pop culture. And there are so many of you who already straddle both of those worlds. We need to make sure that underrepresented voices and folks with lived experience are in writers' rooms. We also propose a cultural narratives fellowship scheme, and there are lots of fantastic examples of this in the US. We would also like to see greater investment in pop culture for social change networks. The fact that this retreat by OKRE and Counterpoints exists is a great example of that, but we definitely need to grow these networks, and we also need to stretch our imagination and bring more investment into gaming, as it's still such a big gap, and then also something we didn't touch on here, but is extensively talked about in the report, is looking at cultural evaluation and impact measurement. It's possible and it is necessary. So Biz, I'll turn it over to you without further ado.
Thanks, Marzena. I'm Biz. I am a political and cultural critic who has published in The New Statesman, The New York Times, and The Nation. I'm the director of Europe's largest community radio station, which is called Resonance FM, and the founder of The Race Beat, which is a network for journalists of colour working in the UK. I'm also editor of a new journal on media and diversity called Representology, and we launch at the end of the month alongside Marcus Ryder. For this report, I've written the foreword, which places the current cultural moment in a wider historical context. In British cultural history, voices outside this narrow privileged class barely had a public airing until the second half of the 20th century. Nowadays, diverse youth-led movements for LGBT rights and disability rights, against racism, sexism and inequality, who feel locked out of economic and political circles, have turned towards culture for their site of expression. So I gathered a diverse range of voices, in the majority writers of colour, to write about the pop culture they're passionate about. Some practitioners, some just fans, but all of the case studies provide an insight into the power of culture, how it inspires or interacts with social change. So first off, as you can see on the slide, we have a wonderful piece on performing stand-up comedy as an expression of power from our wonderful host, Sachrajda, also featuring Krisha Balinska, who is from the No Direction Home comedy troupe. There's this brilliant, scintillating piece by Edwina Omakaro called Lemonade Braids. Edwina's she's the co-founder of the Halo Collective, which has seen in 2021 a number of interventions in the politics of hair, which is, there are a number of articles that have been out there, and the Halo Collective has pushed the idea of Black cultural expression to, I think, a wider audience than it has before. So Edwina's piece is wonderful. If we move on to the next slide, we have Leah Cowan's wonderful piece on Bridgerton. It's very much a long read, and Leah was the former politics editor of Galdem, who has a new book out, Border Nation. But this piece on Bridgerton is brilliant. Maybe I can read a quote from it. Leah says, on screen, we see 19th century dukes and viscounts dressed in fine silk. Behind the scenes, the violent, ravenous machinery of the Industrial Revolution, which popularized the concept of fashion, was built on the forced removal of 12.5 million people from Africa. It's a really wonderful piece. If you can see in the bottom left corner, we have Anisha Hussain's piece. Anisha's from the Kidder Collective, and she's written very passionately about finding a voice as a Muslim school-aged girl through spoken word and setting up their own kind of collectives in an inner-city London school. We also have a number of pieces on theatre and decolonising gaming. And we've got dialogue from outside the industry. So we have a number of in-conversations, as Alice said earlier. We have Juliet Jakes and Hugh Lemmy talking about how, as LGBTQ plus creatives, they found established institutions quite hostile. So they've set up their own forms of audio broadcasting, one podcast and one radio show. But we've also got dialogue from within the industry, and in the top right corner you see that Marcus Ryder, who you've heard from earlier, was in conversation with Angela Ferreira, and Marcus talks about Black communities occasionally having to wash their dirty linen in public. So maybe that's something during the Q&A that we can expand upon. But I hope you enjoy reading them as much as I enjoyed working with the brilliant authors. And please do delve into the report and get in touch. And I'll hand over to Sachrajda.
Thanks, Biz. That was great. So thanks, Alice, Marzena and Biz, for presenting us with the new Brave World report. It looks brilliant. And I'm not just saying that because I've got something in it. It looks brilliant with the illustrations as well. So can't wait to read it all properly. From the audience, can we get some emojis? I'm so much more used to asking for applause, but all emojis are good. There's an applause emoji if you want to go for that one. So yeah, it's now time for the Q&A. I've got a couple of questions, and then I can see in the chat there are a few there, and get ready to put your hand up if you're happy to come on stage and go live. But I've just got a couple here about the report. So for the panel, you say in your report that diverse voices and people with lived experience need to be in writers' rooms and have a voice at the table, leading and directing creative outputs. So what is the first step to getting those voices in the room? And actually, we have a related audience question, which I'll bring in a second if you can't see it. But yeah, just to start with the kind of the writer's room concept, how do we start diversifying those?
Thanks, Chandrika. I can start. So I think organisations like OKRE are playing a really vital role in this space because they're starting to do this brokering, and I think that's what's needed. And there is an element of needing to sort of build up trust. There's sometimes this sort of sense that in the entertainment industry, obviously the objective there is to create compelling content, and then when we work with the voluntary sector, the people in the voluntary sector want to be able to sort of get their issue heard. And I think there's a careful brokering that needs to happen to enable that work to be shared, for people's voices to be heard. And so organisations like OKRE and others, On Road Media, doing this really vital work of helping to bridge some of those differences and some of those connections. And we also refer in the report to a really interesting initiative called Storyline Partners, which is a collaboration of organisations that are working in the entertainment industry. And I think there's some really great lessons we can learn from some of the work in the US that's being done in this space. I'll pass over to Marzena, as she has, I'm sure we'll have more thoughts on that.
Thanks, Alice. That was spot on. And it's such a good question, because I think one thing that came up during our research, especially around gaming, is how many organizations already exist and how many movers and shakers within the industry itself are kind of pushing for this. The question is, what support are they receiving, whether that's access to philanthropic funding or kind of a community of support. Because if you have your one foot within kind of the nonprofit social movement world, and then on the other, the entertainment industry, you're kind of uniquely positioned to be able to speak the language of both. And I think individuals like that and organizations like Code Coven, Pock and Play, Bayman Games, Queerly Represent Me. There are just so many of them that could use support, but often are volunteer run, but are really, at least in the gaming sphere, are the ones who are kind of bringing in voices that maybe are marginalized or historically excluded from narrative design and writers' rooms.
Thank you so much. And that kind of incorporated my second question, which is that philanthropy has overlooked gaming. That's something that's in the report. So I think we covered that. I mean, how can we persuade them to make the investment? Do you think gaming has got there in terms of philanthropy?
I feel like I've been having this conversation for 2 or 3 years now, and I think part of the challenge is that even though I think the current statistics are like 2.5 to 3 billion people globally play some form of a video game, whether that's on your TV through a console or on a PC, or I mean basically on our mobile phones. Mobile gaming actually is one of the fastest growing parts of the industry, but we still sort of find ourselves trying to convince funders that this is an area that's worth investing in part because I think gaming culture feels quite like if you don't speak the language and you feel like you don't know what it's all about, you might be a bit more hesitant to invest in it. So I think I would love to see the same kind of support for like game writers' rooms as we're starting to get for drama and soaps, which is exactly what Alice was writing about quite extensively in the report. Regardless of whether philanthropy is investing or not, the work is happening. So I think maybe my point of caution is that if we don't get kind of greater support from private foundations, then maybe we're going to be facing that issue of regret that Marcus was talking about, that, we had an opportunity to really shape the narrative, shape the story, and frame the conversation. And unfortunately, we missed out.
Did anyone else want to speak on the gaming and philanthropy issue? Or
There's one of my favourite bits in the report is where Marzena talks about how many people game, and she says she wrote something like, "This is nearly a third of the global population," and I remember laughing at her and saying, you know, it is so true. Like it's a huge area, and I think it's an area of potential. It's one that we need to explore and think about. And in the US, obviously, there's been this journey that funders have gone on to recognise the value of working in television in particular and drama, and I think there is a kind of growing acceptance and realization that that's important here in the UK as well, and it's starting to develop, but we do explore this area of gaming in the report because we do feel it is an area of potential and one that we should be thinking about and exploring too.
I'll also just briefly add, and this is something that Biz touches on in his foreword, is this kind of division of what's considered high culture and low culture. And unfortunately, and something that many of our interviewees who work in the industry have said, is that gaming is kind of this third add-on to the entertainment industry that's not really taken seriously, and despite the size of the gaming communities, is perceived as niche. And the people who play games are not perceived as the kind of massively diverse cohort of people as actually play it.
But actually something they might have in common is age. They're probably quite a young demographic, in which case they're such an important and powerful demographic. And they expect diversity probably more than other generations. So it's definitely an area that could do with that kind of investment. I'm just looking for any more questions. Do shout your questions in the chat or put your hand up. Can't see anything there at the moment. Am I missing one? Hang on a second. I think there is a fun fact from Elena Hodge. So the industry, I think you mean the gaming industry, is worth $159 billion in 2020. So that's more than double the music and movie industry combined, which is really, really interesting. There's an image issue around the people who are gamers, I think often, and that there are many more people than we imagine. So going back to the report, something that struck me was the language around power and how culture is power. And I wanted to ask, I think, for Alice, you've worked on the 2017 report. What do you think has changed? Do you think much has changed? And for anyone who hasn't worked on that report, what surprised you about your findings? If you can't speak about what's changed from the last report, then maybe what surprised you?
Such a great question. I think, as I said earlier, when we were working on Riding the Waves, it really felt like we were sort of reviewing the landscape. It was the scoping. It was trying to understand more about this space. And I really did feel like we were sort of sitting, like seeing the kind of the waves of this work and kind of looking out on it. And the difference with this report was the kind of going deeper and really engaging in narrative power and narrative change. And it very much speaks to what Marcus was talking about earlier, around the huge power that narratives play, and like the work of Bridget in helping us to understand that we are surrounded by these narratives all of the time, and that we need to actually actively shape them in order to shift how people think and feel. So for me, it was the difference between the two reports is that this one really getting into the detail around who has power, where there is narrative power, how we can try to shift that. And I think, and then the second thing is around just the huge number of organisations that are now starting to do this work in the UK. It's really exciting. You know, it's so exciting to see this work being developed. And, you know, we refer in the report to the brilliant work that's taking place to strengthen and build networks, like what OKRE's doing, Counterpoints being so innovative. We talk about Access All Areas, the disability theatre company, and they're doing some really exciting work, working with some of the big entertainment streaming platforms. And so this work is really underway. It's and it felt like a really nice opportunity to be able to explore and delve into that. And then the final point was just about the evaluation and impact measurement, and that's something that I feel like with Riding the Waves we didn't really manage to sort of grapple with that, whereas in this report, because we know it's something that funders want to think about and explore, we really wanted to sort of try and get into that. And there's still much more work to be done on that. That's probably for the next report, right, Marzena? Thank you.
And then, just what we'll do is we'll get Marcus back on stage for a bit more of Q&A. But just really quickly, was there anything that surprised you, either Kay or Marzena, about what you found from this report, or was it kind of what you expected in many ways?
I think in terms of the commissions, the submissions that you, Sachrajda, and a dozen other people contributed to, was how, at a time that's quite bleak both politically and economically, that there is this genuine passion around cultural shifts forward. It almost feels that politically there's, a rise of a nativist right. Economically, there's always a recession looming. And yet in culture, there seems to have been visible progress over the last 5 years. And a lot of our contributors, many of whom are young and in economically precarious situations, do have this, that their pieces spark an optimism that the future may look positive in terms of culture, and that maybe even culture could inspire political and economic shifts. So that's what surprised me.
That's a really nice answer.
I'll say this wasn't, I guess, as surprising, but what really, I think the moment that we're in was hit home for me by someone working within a broadcast institution who said that moving forward, media institutions and broadcasters are going to be judged by two things: how they responded to the Black Lives Matter uprisings in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and how they responded to COVID-19. And I think, to me, it's sort of summarized that we really have an opportunity to depart from business as usual. And I think that requires recognizing that kind of twofold relationship of culture and power, right? The fact that power relations have a narrative cultural dimension, and the fact that narrative comes embedded with power, and we have to kind of grapple with and acknowledge both.
Thank you so much. I think we've got Marcus coming back on stage, and while he does that, can we hear from Ros Herrera, from the Director of Solidarity with Refugees? You've raised your hand to ask a question, so got you on stage. Here you go.
There I am. Hi. I don't know how to turn anything on. Oh, there we go. Hang on. Hi. Sorry, I was really incompetent. Hi, Alice. How are you? I just wanted to say, I asked a question on the thing because it's a problem that I keep stumbling up against. That there's super exciting talking about writers' rooms, and I kind of think, yeah, brilliant, writers' rooms. That's great. Except, and I don't know anything about gaming. That's completely my ignorant area. And in my household, like, everyone else knows about it, and I just don't. But in TV drama and that, which is much more my area, I'm very aware that writers' rooms seem to be a thing in America or in the States, and that's a really useful way to be able to access a whole group of people involved in a project and in the development of it and in the writing of it, and at that stage, or indeed to hopefully diversify the writers within that writers' room as well as access to it. But in the UK, in the drama sphere, I'm not sure that I've seen it ever become much of a thing. And maybe it's completely different in games, but in TV drama, I could be completely out of touch. But I don't think it's really taken off here as a concept. And I'm wondering if anybody's got any clever ideas for how you approach drama in the UK in as an effective a way as that. Sorry, that's quite witchery. Sorry.
Thanks, Ros. My understanding is that there are writers' rooms, and they are around drama and on television, and I think they're starting to be more of a feature. we refer in the report to a really interesting inspiration from the US, an organisation called Break the Room, and they are doing this work. They're going into writers' rooms and working with people. And one of the examples we share is East of La Brea, which is a really great drama which was produced with underrepresented groups and has been really influential. And Break the Room having some conversations here in the UK and speaking to people here, and I think there is a kind of growing sense that we need to work a bit more in this space. But I think, I know, Ros, that you're connected with people working in drama and television, and the reality is that some of this work it's not as formalized as having a writer's room, and that sometimes it's just about the kind of connections and the people we know, and that's where I think the brokering and the kind of networking by organizations like OKRE and On Route Media and others is so vital, because it allows us to be able to connect up the people who are working in entertainment with people who have lived experience of issues. And so I think we need to keep to sort of developing that type of work. Marzena, I don't know if you have any more thoughts.
No, I think that makes sense. There are so many ways that I think you could advise on a script in different points in the process at which people can get engaged. Like the organization Queerly Represent Me, which works, they have some staff in the, it's mostly volunteer run. They have some staff in the US and I believe some in Europe and the UK. And they mostly advise on, different types of games, from small indie studios to kind of major AAA companies. And, they could get involved at various stages of the process, from like shaping the entirety of a certain character, right? Or lead protagonist, all the way to just giving kind of gut checks on certain scripts and dialogues to make sure that there's nothing problematic. And I think their desire is to get people with lived experience. So if you have a queer character, a trans character, that it's not a white cis middle-aged man who's kind of shaping the development of that character. And then the other one that's really interesting is the Able Gamers charity, which specifically works with gamers living with disabilities. And they often have, major companies come to them and sort of test different features and mechanics. So they have this 500 player, they call them player pools, but basically it's 500 players with disabilities who have kind of a very diverse range of lived experiences, who kind of gut check and test different games. And the best part is that they're compensated for it. So Able Gamers is just sort of a broker, but they don't really, they don't take a cut from that relationship. So I think there's some really good examples to look at.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ros. That was a really interesting question. So no more raised hands. Any more? We can take one more quick question from the audience. Anyone at all there? Okay.
What I would add to the writer's room question would be the fact that a lot of British talent has gone to America and joined American writers' rooms. I mean, in my sort of field of interest, the crossover between drama and comedy, I know that both Veep and Succession had a considerable number of British writers and British writing talent working in their writers' rooms for very successful multi-season drama comedies. It's something that the BBC have, I think, yet to adapt to, but maybe we'll see it over the coming years.
Just to add my tiny amount to that, I've worked in a writer's room for Radio 4, so for the Now show. Again, this was all in lockdown, so it was all over Zoom. But for the Now show, we certainly worked over Zoom and we threw ideas around. But I worked in the news quiz, and that's slightly different. But we kind of we were given subjects to talk about, so it's not everything in the news. It's like 5 or 6 subjects. We were given 1 or 2 subjects, and then you kind of pitch them right back to the producer, who takes it to the host. So it's a bit more linear, but it seems like with radio, possibly, that the BBC are going a bit more that way. I mean, there are lots of schemes as well. So some people have put in the chat that there's BBC writers' rooms, there's comedy writers' rooms, dramas writers' rooms, and all sorts of things like that. So it looks like they're trying to move towards more of a writers' room. And certainly, I mean, it's a good area to find more representation, and it's less pressure on one writer to be all things and everything, because writers are usually given executive producer credits and other things to sweeten the deal these days as well, because if they go to Netflix, they'll definitely get that. So there's also a competition element there. So it looks like, unless we've got any other questions or anyone else wanting to raise their hands. Okay, we had really, really good, lots of thank yous. And yeah, please show your appreciation again, seeing loads of clapping emojis. Thanks so much to Alice, Biz and Marzena for that great panel and for bringing the report to us as well. So we'll wrap up the Q&A because we've got some speed networking to talk about before we go for lunch. So after this, you get the opportunity to go to speed networking in the lounge, and you'll get to meet each other, because today is not just about us talking to you and telling us what we've been up to and how things should work. It's about people meeting each other and finding collaborators and new ways of doing things. So you'll get your chance to do that in a minute. So to get into the lounge and click on, so to get into the lounge, that is where you go speed networking. And from now, to tell you how to do that, I think I'll pass over to Sam, if that's okay. And do you want to take people through the slightly more technical side of how they start speed networking? Is that okay? Brilliant.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Hi, also, you should get a notification shortly. I'll just pin myself. There we go. You should get a notification shortly that should take you right there. Otherwise, you just have to exit this session that you're in now, go to the lounge, and right at the top of the lounge, there is a little panel thing that says Start Speed Networking. Click there. Essentially what's going to happen is it will run for about 15 minutes. There'll be 3 5-minute sessions. So you will be randomly paired with someone. You can ask a couple of questions, have a chance to network, have a chance to chat. And once that 5 minutes is done, you'll move on to the next person. Yeah, I think, are you talking about lunch, or would you like me to quickly say something about that?
Yeah, I'll do the lunch bit, and there's a few bits. Thank you for that, Sam. So if you get stuck in your speed networking room and you think, I've got nothing to say, we've got some ideas for you. You could share one piece of learning from the past year. That piece can be lower backs get painful when you're staying at home for a year. That's something I've learned. Could be a fun chat. I don't know about that. You could also talk about what is feeding your optimism. So strangely, I feel like I've been quite optimistic this year. Part of it is that I've met so many people online, and I don't think we used online to its limits before this year when we had to. And there's been something amazing about events like this, Zoom calls and all those things. So that's been really great. You can chat about anything else you want about what you've heard about today from the panel so far. And when you've finished your conversation, you can just hang out in the lounge. So it's just 15 minutes, 5 minutes for each meeting. And then we have an hour lunch break as well. So in the afternoon, we've got some workshops as well. So I'll just quickly run them down for you. We have Climate Stories at Work with Nikki Hawkins, Director of Communications at On Road Media. Then we also have Race, Media and the Cultural Creative Sectors in the UK. The third workshop is What does it mean to channel your ancestry and your imagination to bring yourself to exactly where you need to be? Then the fourth workshop is Genuine or Fake. And the fifth workshop is Meaningful Collaboration, Learning from Skin Deep. So those start at 1:30. So please come back after lunch at 1:30 and choose your workshop. But for the minute, in the lounge, speed networking starts at 1:15 and it goes on till 1:30. Go, say hello. I'm going to go in there. I'm not going to talk about my bad back. I'm going to be much more fun than that. And we'll see you in speed networking in a second. All right, thanks.